Hello, everyone. Just gonna wait a couple minutes, let everybody get into the room, and then we'll get started. So just be patient with us. Again, thank you all for joining us today. Just give us another minute or two, and we will begin momentarily. All right, seems like we still have a few people rolling in, so I'm gonna wait one more minute before we get started. All right, well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Just want to cover a few housekeeping items before we get started. This session is being recorded, and we will email everyone the recording after the event. We have captions available, so feel free to use those as needed. We will have time for live Q&A at the end, so please use the Q&A box, and we will answer as many of the questions as we can at the end of the presentation. We sometimes miss questions if they get put into the chat, so again, I request everybody to use the Q&A box for questions. Lastly, I'd also like to mention if anyone needs any accessibility support, training, usability testing, I will be sending out an email with a link to schedule a time to speak with one of our experts after the webinar. And with that, I will let Charlie get started providing an introduction of himself. And again, thank everyone for joining us today.
Thanks, Kerry, and welcome everybody to this webinar. And my name is Charlie Pike. I'm the Director of Platform Success at TPGI, which means I'm really kind of the liaison between our customers and the platform. And I have been in the accessibility world for over 20 years now. So I've had a lot of experience in all aspects of accessibility, from program management down to testing, auditing, etc. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is how you can easily test for JAWS screen reader accessibility. And I'm actually going to present a couple of, five specific tests that you could run quickly and easily without much experience with our tool JAWS Inspect to do that screen reader compatibility testing on a regular and constant basis to improve your accessibility. So just a quick agenda and run through of what we're going to cover. I'll do an introduction to the topic, talk a bit about JAWS Inspect and JAWS itself for testing. Explain a little bit about when and how to test with JAWS, where really it fits into an overall testing program. And then I'm going to show you those 5 accessibility checks that is a kind of a minimum requirement around testing accessibility, but something you can do, as I say, regularly and with not much experience. But the main part of this will be a demonstration of JAWS Inspect in action, doing the tests, having a look at a sample site, interpreting results and so on, and sort of giving you a very good, clear idea of how all that works. And then, as Carrie said, I'll take questions at the end. So feel free as you go along, if you question or something occurs to you, put it in the Q&A panel, and I will get back and read it out and try to address it at the end. I'm going to leave enough time at the end to address questions. So first of all, as a background to why you would be doing JAWS testing at all, what is JAWS? So JAWS stands for Job Access with Speech. It's the world's most popular Windows screen reader. 30 years. We'll be celebrating CSUN next week, 30 years of JAWS. Enables a blind or visually impaired user to read the text that is displayed on the computer screen with a speech synthesizer or braille display. Oh, something just happened to my screen there. One second. My screen sharing went bananas. That's never happened before. Okay, sorry about that. So that's the background to JAWS. So it's the world's most popular screen reader. So it makes sense from that fact alone that you would want to test compatibility with JAWS on your websites and so on. This is what most people are using. It's been around for a long time, and its support for web browsers, web technologies, all kinds of technologies really is very robust and long-standing. So why test with JAWS? To test compatibility with screen readers. That's the obvious case, to make sure that your sites, your applications, etc., work correctly with screen readers. To evaluate the user experience, a slightly less obvious one, but a real benefit of testing with screen readers is to go beyond mere compliance and to actually test usability. It matters. You could be technically compliant and actually not really accessible, because for the user, the interface is too verbose, it's too inefficient, they can't get around it, etc. JAWS cuts through all of that and gives you a sense of what the actual user's experience of your application or site is. Much better, therefore, also for prioritizing things. If you can't fix everything, fix the things that are having the biggest impact on users. So it helps you to go past guidelines and grasp accessibility. It sometimes the guidelines, such as the WCAG guidelines, can get between the tester or developer and the actual problem or the user. Okay, so you're following technical guidelines, but you don't really understand what you're doing because you don't understand the natural nature of the challenges that users are facing. Okay, testing with JAWS gets you a better, developers, particularly when they test with the likes of JAWS Inspect and JAWS, they get a better understanding of what the problem is. Okay, I see it now. This is what the user is trying to do, and this is why it's hard, for instance, to deal with a button that has no label. And once they get it, then it's much easier to do from then on. And testing with JAWS really helps them to get the challenge. And it may be technically accessible, but is it usable? As I said, you can pass all of those tests, and I'll be showing you examples today of things that might pass a test for WCAG compliance, Section 508 compliance, etc., but may not actually be in any way usable. So that brings us to JAWS Inspect. So JAWS Inspect simplifies accessibility and JAWS compatibility testing. Okay, what it provides you with is transcripts of JAWS output without all the various end user features, such as the shortcut keys. JAWS has an awful lot of shortcut keys and various other features that are of value to the user, but not really of value to the tester. And so it simplifies the whole process, easy to learn. You get transcripts of the JAWS output, and that helps you diagnose issues. I will say, important to point out, and I'll say it again later on, it's not a testing tool per se. JAWS Inspect does not test a site or an application and tell you where there are failures or issues. What it does is give you a transcript of the JAWS speech so you can easily diagnose those issues. And this is an important point, share them easily when you find them with your quality control and compliance systems. So the benefits are, obviously, it's simpler than JAWS. You can be up and running at JAWS Inspect very, very quickly. And I'll show you today. There's very little interface. You'll be learning it, a few minutes and you'll be up and running. It gives you that text transcript, so it's easy to share. Among the first users of JAWS Inspect were actually JAWS users who were having a lot of trouble sharing what they were finding because they were listening to the JAWS audio going through their pages. And they were hearing things that were clearly wrong, but then how do you tell the user, it was the third thing I heard, how do you actually share that with users? JAWS Inspect makes that very, very easy. It helps with the identification issue. So it doesn't identify issues, but as I'll show you, it's very, very easy to identify them with JAWS Inspect. It provides a rapid rollout, limited training, and it really demonstrates the impact of accessibility on users. One important point is you don't have the timing issue that you would have if you're testing with JAWS and you're not experienced with JAWS. JAWS speaks quickly. Even if you slow it down, you're it's moving on. You get time to really look at the full transcript with JAWS Inspect and analyze it and take your time to identify issues. So the top features are a clear visual illustration of what JAWS users experience and no need for accessibility expertise to understand them. So here we've got a very simple example from the Amazon website of an image of a product. And beside it, we have the JAWS speech, or what JAWS said when it encountered this particular product, okay, a product ad. And it's Amazon device deals, link graphic. The link graphic is bolded in green text to differentiate it. This is different from what was the content of that image on the page, is actually the helper text, the helper content, if you like, that JAWS supplies to the user to help them understand the context and what the element is. So in this case, we have an image that's a link. So JAWS says link graphic, so the user knows what they can do with it. Okay, they know they can then select that link and activate the link. So it's Amazon device deals link graphic. So we can see that clearly. We've got a nice transcript, so we can check it to see, is it correct? Is it descriptive of the image? And is it helpful to the user? Okay, very, very simple. So you don't need technical expertise to understand, are the right tags applied? Are they applied in the right way, etc., etc. You can just focus in on the content and the issue at hand. So you don't really need to be a technical expert. So when and how do you test with JAWS? So this is a graphic I like to share a lot, the onion, the testing onion, if you like, of different types of testing that you can do and the different layers to those testing. So that outermost layer of the onion are domain scans or website scans. That's your high level view, which you can do with products like our ARC platform across thousands or 10,000 pages or more if needs be. And you're looking for the broad picture there. How are we doing over time? Is this site more accessible than that site? What are the trends over time and how are we dealing with issues? So it's really to get that big picture for a big organization. A layer deeper than that are user flows. Those are typically key flows. So if you were a shopping website, for instance, it might be your shopping cart flow. That's the key one, where the user makes purchases, takes to the checkout, pays, etc. You test those. That's on a smaller number of things, maybe 20 components or pages or screens or whatever. And you're looking deeper and you're looking for usability and you're looking for accessibility and you want to make sure those things work correctly. The really detailed and thorough compliance testing are your manual expert audits. That's something that we at TPGI do day in, day out. We have big teams doing that. Your only way to understand completely your compliance with, for example, WCAG, is to do an audit. In other words, to test against all of the criteria. Whereas your domain scans and user flow scans are typically automated testing, and they have their limitations in terms of what they can test. But the nugget at the center of the onion here is things like AT testing, like with JAWS Inspect, user feedback, and user research, which is the really detailed one that gets done very little in reality around accessibility, but is very, very valuable. All of those elements, including the AT testing or assistive technology testing, they tell you much more about how ultimately accessible something is. Okay, they're not narrowly about compliance. They're much more about what's the experience for the user and are they fully accessible. When you've got good results from that, you really have an accessible application or site. Okay, so that's really where it comes in. It's that extra layer that provides the, if you like, copper fastens your efforts and guarantees that it's either accessible or it needs to be improved. So just to have a look at an example of where it might fit inside an accessibility assembly line or a development lifecycle, software development lifecycle. So here we've got a very, very simple one. Everyone's pipeline is, of course, very different and more complex than this. But just to give you an idea, we have several phases. We have monitoring to start off with, then plan your development, code, commit the code, test, release, and then you're back to monitoring. Okay. In this case, our ARC platform, for example, can do your monitoring. That's where we're talking about domain monitoring, scanning large amounts of stuff, and using that to track progress, prioritize, and set policies. So your accessibility program manager, for example, is using that kind of tool for that broad picture to try and implement initiatives, improve keyboard accessibility, improve, labeling of elements, etc. We also have a JAWS Connect service as part of that allows you to manage user feedback. Okay. Then you get into the planning phase, and this is where the likes of JAWS Inspect come in, because they will help you prioritize what you fix based on what's impacting the user the most. Okay, if you can't fix everything in one go, you can prioritize user issues by testing with JAWS Inspect. Then you have, for coders, you have things like the ARC Toolkit, which is a browser extension I will show you today, which helps developers test on the fly issues. So it can translate a lot of that stuff that JAWS Inspect you've identified using JAWS Inspect, can be translated into technical issues with the likes of the ARC Toolkit to fix, and I'll show you examples of that. Then you commit your code. You have usually automated testing with Node.js and these types of applications. And there again, JAWS Inspect can be used to run quick tests. This is particularly what I want to focus on today, because your QA teams, for instance, can run very, very quick tests on a regular basis. So you can't do an audit every time you have a release, especially in the world of Agile, right? But you could do these checks. They're very, very quick. They don't require a lot of experience and knowledge. You could do them constantly. And if they throw up a lot of issues, then that might be enough to actually stop the release and go back and say, okay, we've got something serious wrong here. That was done. And then you're back to the release cycle and you're monitoring again. And hopefully, as you're monitoring, you're seeing the results of that testing and that fixing in the process, and your accessibility should be better with this release, okay, and with each release. Here's an example of JAWS Inspect with other tools. For instance, with JAWS Inspect, looking at alternate text for images, we've got the example again from the Amazon website of the image and Amazon device deals link graphic. So that helps us check the content, the alternate text descriptions for images and make sure that they're adequate and people understand them. But then with the ARC toolkit, as I said, that's the technical tool that can translate these issues. So same image, but in this case, you're checking the actual tags to make sure that it's tagged correctly. So if an issue is found when you're looking at JAWS Inspect, with the ARC toolkit, you can get down to the cause, which is the incorrect tag or no tag, whatever the case might be. And here's another example, JAWS Inspect looking at fields in a form, and you've got a form here with first name as a label, edit required. Okay, so that is what JAWS is announcing for this particular text field. It's the first name field, and the helper text tells us it's an edit box and it is a required field. Okay, so we can check whether this is added. And again, you don't need to know whether the tags, the tester with JAWS Inspect doesn't need to know what tags contributed to that. They just need to check and make sure that it's usable for the user. And then again, with ARC Toolkit, you can check that everything is done from the perspective of the tags and the HTML. So when it comes down to these 5 simple tests, what are the benefits? So easy to perform using JI, and I'm going to demonstrate them today. Anyone can do them, little technical knowledge needed. You need to start getting familiar with JAWS and the way JAWS use the software and how it behaves, but you really don't need to have an in-depth understanding of accessibility. They're very good indicators of overall accessibility. We pick them out because they're a very good gauge, like a cross-section of accessibility. They hit on all areas of, if you like, assistive technologies, not just JAWS, because you do things like keyboard testing. And you'll find the things that are the biggest impact for users. Okay. So as I say, if you see a lot of problems when you do this testing, it's a good indicator that there are wider problems there and you need to do more extensive testing. So here are the tests. So test 1 is a well-known one from the accessibility world, which is non-text content. That's an obvious one that you need to do. Test 2, a little less obvious. It's about headings and structure, checking your headings and structure, okay, which can be, again, indicators of wider issues if the headings and structure aren't correct. Test form labels and form fields in general. Make sure your forms have identity, role, and state information, etc., to convey to the screen reader. Links and link text, because they're key, obviously, to the web. And keyboard and interaction. Okay, and keyboard and interaction is one that has an impact on a lot of assistive technologies. A lot of users are dependent on some element of keyboard navigation, and it's also in terms of introduced to accessibility testing, it's the easiest to understand. It just means unplugging your mouse, disconnecting your mouse, and testing with the keyboard. Okay, there's more to it than that in terms of the different scenarios and what's right and what's wrong. But in general, the process of the testing is very simple. So I'm going to switch over now to show you some of these tests in action. So I have JAWS Inspect installed here. This is a Windows machine. So the first thing to understand about JAWS Inspect, it is a Windows desktop application. We are working on a version where you can run from our ARC system and actually collect JAWS Inspect reports on demand, if you were on a Mac or anything else. But the full product is a desktop product for the simple reason that it is JAWS. Okay, JAWS Inspect is JAWS, what we call minimal JAWS. So you have the JAWS engine running, but it's minimalized. In other words, a lot of the end features, such as the shortcut keys, the JAWS shortcut keys, are not available. So it's very, very simple, but it's still JAWS. So you're not getting a simulation of JAWS. This is a very important point. Whatever output you get from JAWS Inspect is the JAWS Inspect, is what JAWS would say, if you like. It is the JAWS output. It's coming from JAWS. And I'm accessing now a JAWS Inspect from the tray icon in Windows, and I'm going to right-click on the JAWS Inspect icon to get the menu. I mentioned that the interface is very simple. This is actually most of the interface. So you've got a few elements here around your help, what's new, etc. But you've also got your settings. And I just wanted to show you in the settings here. Obviously, there's a few things you can customize, where you put your reports and so on. But you can also customize your version of JAWS. So you can run previous versions of JAWS if you want to check compatibility with earlier releases. Okay, and that can go three versions back if you want to. But as I said, it is JAWS. It is completely JAWS, the product. So you're getting your transcripts from the horse's mouth, if you like, directly from JAWS, not in a simulation. So that's all there is to it in terms of setting and so on. The main real interface is here in the web browser. Okay, so we're on our sort of sample web store, and I'm just going to open up the first example, which is of images graphics, because that's our first test. Okay, so we've got a page here, typical shopping page with graphics. Now, to start JAWS Inspect or invoke the JAWS Inspect menu, I'm going to hold down the Control key and right-click. Quick note here, my demonstrations of JAWS Inspect do tend to be rather clicky, as someone once said to me, because most of the end users here are not JAWS users, okay? They're testers, they're not JAWS users. But everything in JAWS Inspect is fully accessible itself. So you can use it with JAWS, and there are JAWS users who use JAWS Inspect, all the time. So I'm going to run one of our reports. We have several reports here, and this menu is really the majority of the interface. This is what you'll be using most of the time with JAWS Inspect, and I'm going to run a full page report. So now there's a large cursor appears, and that's actually JAWS. You'll see the page scrolling. JAWS is actually going through the page from top to bottom, encountering all the elements that are available here, and basically speaking and outputting this transcript. And now in a new browser window, we have our report. Okay. This is a breakdown of all the content on the page, the links, controls, frames, headings, graphics, etc., broken down in a way that the developer or tester can easily analyze and get around. We've got some metadata about when the test was run and with what. And we are going to check graphics. So we're going to open up the graphics report, okay? And we get our JAWS transcript in a table with all the various relevant information. We've got, for instance, the JAWS speech itself. So the first element encountered on the page was this home page icon. And JAWS spoke nav underscore icon underscore 213M. So that's clearly an auto-generated, probably from the title of the image or the URL of the image, and it's a visited link graphic, which, as I said, is the helper context that JAWS provides the user. So right away, we can see that's not very helpful description. That's really not going to help the user. So that might pass a technical accessibility test because it has alternate text. But with JAWS Inspect, you can immediately see that the alternate text is really no use. Okay, so we talked about both the usability, and that isn't in any way usable, and going beyond technical testing, but also how easy it is. So it hasn't told us, JAWS Inspect hasn't told us that there's anything wrong with that, but if you know what to look out for, that's clearly a problem. And then when you want to go to share that with your developers and say there's something wrong with that image, you get the actual code here displayed so you can provide that to them. Okay. You also get help with graphics here. And this is a guide to how JAWS interacts with graphics, the types of shortcut keys the user uses, the types of JAWS behavior, etc. So that you can start to understand what to expect, what's correct behavior on JAWS and what's not correct. In other words, there's a problem or an issue with the code on the page. Okay. So you start to build a familiarity with typical JAWS behavior, how you get the list of graphics, for instance, from JAWS. Also very nice, and a new feature here is FS Companion. And FS Companion provides a ChatGPT solution specifically for JAWS. So I can say, how does JAWS interact with graphics, for instance, and it'll come back with specific JAWS information. And here's a nice guide, graphics and link. When JAWS encounters a graphic that is also a link, it announces link graphic, graphic settings, information order, graphics labels, graphic verbosity. So you get a very good guide broken down and numbered for you on things to consider around graphics and JAWS. What are the problems JAWS users can have with graphics, let's say? And you can really ask these questions anyway. So there we go. Lack of alt text, inadequate alt text. We just saw an example of that. Complex images, decorative images that shouldn't have alt text, image maps, etc. So you've got a full resource here for helping you to understand JAWS. And this AI has been focused entirely on JAWS itself, nothing else. So it's very, very tailored to that content. You won't get anything extraneous. Okay, so that all helps you to understand what's going on here, where there are problems, when there are not. And we can see several examples. This is clearly from a content management system. It's just been auto-generated and is gobbledygook and meaningless to the user. Likewise, we've got 3 images of shoes in different colors, but our alternate text is just shoe graphic, shoe graphic, shoe graphic. Okay, so this is meaningless and not helpful to the user. We can select all these. Once we've identified them as issues, we can select them all and export them. And the export options are CSV for spreadsheets or JSON, which is a machine readable format for the likes of Jira and bug tracking systems, etc. Okay. So very easy to use, very easy to understand where there are issues, and very focused on the user experience over just pure compliance. Okay. And talked about the ARC toolkit and using that to identify the actual technical causes of these issues. If I hit Control-Shift-I, I'm opening up my developer tools in the browser. And here's the ARC toolkit, which is a free extension, browser extension. If I run some tests here on this same page, I'll see errors with the images, missing link alt attribute, for instance, here. And it'll give you the specific code causes of the issues. Link text. It will also, where possible, highlight them on the page for you so you can identify them and you can jump straight to the code. There's an example of the highlighting. Jump straight to the code of the item in your developer tools and find the problem. Okay, so there you can send off to the your developers that there's a problem with the images on the page, such as the shoe graphics, and they can then do their technical testing with the toolkit and find out where the issue is and address it. Okay, the right tool in the right hands in that case. So that's test 1 on graphics. Let's now have a look at, under here, at structure. Okay, so here's a news page on a website. It's got a complex layout. You've got a single column, then you've got 4 columns, and then you've got the news with the headlines, the abstract, and a supporting image laid over 3 columns. Okay, visually, for the visual user, this is very easy to understand and quickly focus in on the story you want to find. You can just scan over it and you get a sense of the structure immediately. But for the screen reader user who's going through the page item by item in a linear order, how do they understand where things are and how the page is laid out? It's complex. So in this case, we're going to use a different test. And let me just refresh this to get rid of my visualization. I'm going to use a different report. So again, control right click to open up my JAWS Inspect menu, and I'm going to run the Say All report. And again, JAWS is running and scrolling through the page. You can actually see it scrolling. So this report is different from the last one in that it basically uses the Say All command. And the Say All command is something JAWS users can use to get JAWS to really read everything on the page top to bottom in a linear order. Okay, so it's very, very straightforward. So again, it's the whole page and all the content on it. But in this case, we're looking at it in a purely linear order. We're not breaking it down by categories. So this is a very good sense. You get a very good sense of what the experience is for the user here. We can see news, the title of the page first, the skip to main content link, the navigation region. The developers here have set up regions, which is very good because it makes it easier for the user to skip over things and identify them. So we've got a navigation region. We've got the links. Here's our visited link graphic once again, and our problem there. Very easy to spot things that are missing that JAWS doesn't announce because, for instance, you're going to have graphics in there that have no alternate text, and perhaps JAWS doesn't announce them at all, or they have empty alternate text, and maybe they shouldn't be ignored. So you'll be able to spot when things are missing because you're in a linear order. But we want to look at the structure. The structure is key for the user to be able to get around a complex page like that. For instance, the JAWS user can use the H key to just listen to the headings in order. Keep pressing the H key and it'll cycle through the headings on the page. So they could, in theory, jump very quickly to the news stories they want to hear and get a sense of how the page is laid out, what the different sections are. And we indeed have plenty of headings, and they're nested for the most part correctly. Heading level 1, heading level 2, heading level 3. It's a nice structure. But the problem is the verbosity. Virtually everything, certainly the news stories, the abstracts, are all headings. So that's challenging for the user. Now it kind of negates the value of the structure because everything is structure. And they really have to, if they were to cycle through that with the heading H key, they'd be listening to an awful lot of stuff. In fact, everything on the page, pretty much. And that's something you see often. Developers who know a little about accessibility, but not a lot, don't really understand the problem for the user. And that might pass, again, technical testing, but it's not usable. Okay. And it's put even more starkly in the report at the bottom here, which is the page structure report, which breaks it all down, the whole page structure and the structure only in a kind of like a Microsoft Word outline view. So here we can see our heading structure. We've got a region here, the main region. We've got another region, top news stories. That's great. But then look at these headings. They're a mile long, okay, because they feature the whole abstract, the heading, everything. So that is an issue, and we've identified a usability problem there. You can switch, by the way, these reports to a table view as well, which makes it easier to select items and share them with your teams once you've identified issues. Oh, got a slight pause there. So this report is great. As I said, you've got the choice between the full page report, which is one that breaks things down by category, or this Say All report, which really breaks it down in a linear order so you can identify structural problems. I'm not sure what the issue is here. The browser is hanging. Hopefully it'll come back to us in a second. There we go. Okay. Just close that report. The next item I wanted to look at was an example of a form. Okay. And so this is a very, very simple form just to give you a sense of it. Now, the thing about forms is slightly more complex. For the screen reader user, they need to know certain things about a form field if they're going to be able to interact and use that form field. For example, if it's a checkbox, they need to know what the label of that checkbox is. Well, what is it? Am I signing up for a newsletter? What is it doing? The other thing I need to know is the role, that it is a checkbox. If it is a checkbox, I know how to interact with it. I'm not supposed to type a message. I'm supposed to just check or uncheck. And it's state. So it's identity, its role, and its state. And the state is whether it's checked or not checked. I need to know if it's checked or not checked if I'm going to be able to interact with that checkbox. Okay, so identity, role, and state of the items is key to be able to interact with them. And here we've got a very simple form, as I said. And again, I'm going to run the full page report on this because I want to specifically look at the form, nothing else on the page. So the categorization helps me. So again, JAWS is reading through the page. And once it's finished, it's going to gather everything into our report. And there it is again. So this time I'm going to go into the controls section and I'm going to look specifically at the form fields. Okay, and I've got a nice screenshot of each one so I can see what we're looking at. And I'm going to go down to our actual form. So the first item is first name, edit required. Note that visually the required state is made clear to the visual user with an asterisk. However, that's not available to the screen reader user. They might interpret it or understand it, but it's really not helpful. But helpfully, the developer has supplied additional information to JAWS here that the field is required. Okay, so JAWS announced edit required. So that's everything I need to know about this field. Okay, it's an edit box, it's the first name edit box, and it's a required field. Okay, I don't need to know state in this case because it's editable or it's read only, and in this case you can edit it. However, the last name is also required, and that information has not been supplied. It's just edit. Okay, and again we've got address edit, but that's fine. That's not required. But then the next box is simply edit. Okay, so there's no label there at all. So that's an immediate problem. And then if we go down here, we'll see a common problem with placeholders. So there's a placeholder here of USA. There is no other label. So JAWS has used the placeholder as the label. That's clearly the country box. But there's no label for country. So JAWS has used the placeholder, which is USA. So again, this illustrates how easy it is. Once you know the basics of how a JAWS user is supposed to interact with form fields, it's very, very easy to spot where there are issues. JAWS Inspect may not flag them for you, but you'll have no problem identifying them this way. Okay. And again, if I open up, so I hit Control Shift and I once again to open up my ARC toolkit and run a test on this page, I'll see required field not programmatically declared. So we saw that problem. As a tester, we may not know that what's missing there is that it's programmatically declared, but the developer gets the information they need, which is that this core element is missing, and they've got instructions, the label associated with the form, etc., and an explanation of how this relates to WCAG. So the technical testing can be done in the toolkit or in ARC, and that all the tester, the QA tester in this case, needs to do is identify it for the developer that there's a problem there. Okay, and it's clearly going to impact users because they're not going to be able to interact with a field where they can't read the label. They don't know the label. Similarly, if we go back to our news page, a key element in here is our links. And if we run the full page report once again on that page, we can look specifically at links. So testing links is key. Obviously, when you're testing web content, etc., it's if your links aren't working correctly, users simply can't get around. So once again, our full page report, we're running on this page and JAWS is reading through it, and we can look at our links section. We've got AS heading level link visited, awesome store visited link, so far so good. Home visited link, so we know the state it's been visited, about AS link, etc. And there again, our graphic is a problem. Nav icon 2.1213M visited link. So what is that? Where does that go? What's the target of that link? And that's really what you need to convey with a link, is where is it going to take me? What's the target of it? And then we also have links on almost everything. Similar to our problem with the headings, our stories have 2 links each, both going to the same place. Okay, so again, we have an issue with verbosity. That might be fine from a point of view of the accessibility testing, the WCAG compliance testing, but it's clearly an issue for the user. It's a usability issue. And finally, we talked about keyboard and interaction. Okay, and that's an important part. We have another tool that helps with interactive elements and things, dynamic elements that don't always appear straight away on the page when it loads, and that's the speech viewer. So if we control right click and open up our speech viewer, this is the most versatile tool in the JAWS Inspect. This is the live log of JAWS speech. So you can do things on the page and the JAWS speech will be captured for you. So we've started a session here. It shows up in a panel below the browser. You can float this around the screen. You have a lot of options of how to display this speech viewer. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to click down on the navigation bar at the top to put focus at the start of the page. And then I'm just going to use my keyboard. Okay, so straight away I put focus up there and we've got AS heading level 1 link visited. Okay, that's a log of the first element that we've encountered. And now I'm going to use the tab key to get around. Okay, so I'm testing with the keyboard at the same time as I'm testing with JAWS, much closer to the actual JAWS user experience. And first up, we've got that visited heading level 1 link AS, awesome store link. I'll just read these out to you because they may not be clear on my screen share. Home, link, that's fine. Shop, link, and we've got the menu. So that's something, the menu wouldn't appear in the full page report because it's not open when the page is loaded and JAWS reads it. So if you want to test dynamic elements, as I'm doing now with the tab key, I can do so here. So there are rules around keyboard access to menus, for instance, when they should open, how they should open. These are the kinds of things you can test with this test. But also, so I'll cycle through these menus and I'm getting the JAWS feedback all along. But then the focus returns to the icon. So we were on the home page link earlier, but now we've cycled all the way around and we return to the icon. So the icon receives keyboard focus, but it probably shouldn't because it's redundant in this case, and we've come back. So it's ruined our flow, if you like, and probably confused the user. Why am I back here? Okay, and likewise, the shop icon receives focus. So there's a problem that we've identified straight away. And now we'll attempt to open the shopping cart. And it opens for us, very good, using the keyboard. I use the space bar there. We've got a close cart button. I'm a product link. So I can run through the interaction here and click on things, select things, add items to my cart, etc. And all the time I'm getting feedback on the JAWS speech. And when I'm done with the process, I can pause that and I can then save either a section or the whole thing, the whole log, again to JSON or CSV, CSV being compatible with the likes of Excel for reports in spreadsheets. And I've got my transcript of the interaction. So you could run through the whole shopping cart process here. You could test a user flow. You could run through as a user, select an item on the shop, put it in your cart, take the cart to the checkout, run that whole process from the user's perspective, test the usability with the keyboard and make sure everything operates with the keyboard as expected. So it needs to be efficient. It needs to be intuitive. You don't want to be doing custom keyboard interaction that the user has got to figure out. So you test all of that, and then you've got a transcript of the whole process, and you can go through the transcript and identify where there might be issues. So it's technically very easy testing. Again, you can use the toolkit then to identify technical causes of some of these issues. This speech viewer is very versatile because you can use it also with PDFs, with Microsoft Word, with anything that JAWS supports. Okay, so if JAWS runs on that software, PowerPoint, whatever it be, then you can use the speech viewer with it and test it. So that's unique. There aren't too many accessibility tools that can test your document formats, etc. So anything that JAWS will run here, and you can get a transcript of the speech. So those are the 5 different tests in action. Again, I would say to you, those are things that you should probably always be doing with every release. They can be done very quickly. You get up and running with the tool very quickly, but also the tests are easy enough to understand, and you'll gradually become more familiar with the types of issues that users have. But you can focus in on those core things, and they will make a huge difference to the accessibility, but also they will be indicators of wider issues. So as I said, if you're having problems with, for instance, with that keyboard access, then that's going to impact a lot of users, and it's probably existing throughout the site. So it's something you need to test more extensively. So we'll have a look now at some of your questions. I just have to open up my chat box here. Okay. I've opened up the wrong box, have I? Oh, here we go. Yes. So I'm seeing one question. So I'm seeing that the JAWS inspect results are a matter of interpretation. That's correct. Oh, that's not a question.
Do you want me to read out the questions?
Oh no, I have them now. Sorry, I've just got a lot of panels. I'm in higher education field. Does JAWS Inspect work inside course management systems? It will really, like such as Canvas, Blackboard, etc. It will really run in anything. If it runs in the browser, for instance, JAWS Inspect is going to run on it. If JAWS runs with it, JAWS Inspect will run with it. So you can test your course management systems. Likewise, it runs on the desktop, so you can test Word, you can test any of those things. What can you use for a Mac device? So obviously this doesn't run on a Mac, but however, I am using a Mac. I'm using a Mac with Parallels running a virtual machine. It works very well. But also be aware that we're coming with a version that will be able to generate those reports that I showed you from our platform, our ARC platform, remotely. So you can be on a Mac in your browser there, and you can generate reports without installing JAWS Inspect. If you're working on a Mac, would you recommend installing a virtual machine? So yeah, yes, absolutely. As I said, I run that on Parallels. You can run it with VMware or whatever you've got, and it works extremely well. in the form, is the combo box with the list of states accessible? How does JAWS navigate that? Well, JAWS will announce it as a select box or whatever, and it will list the options one by one to the user. So that is accessible, should be accessible. Again, it needs to have a label. It needs to be understood by role as a combo box or a select box for the user to understand that there are options that they're going to pick. And then all the content in there needs to be accessible to the user. Sometimes select boxes have search fields in them and various other elements. The more complex a widget like that gets, the less usable it tends to be, and not just for JAWS users. So just be aware of that. It's a very complex select box, then it may pose problems. You showed examples of H3s, which were very long. What's the ideal length for a heading? Well, here's really where JAWS Inspect really very much comes in. I mean, obviously, there is no hard and fast rule on how long a heading should be. But if you read through the page and you understand that the user's got to get around here and get a sense of what are the headings, how is this page organized, where's the news story versus the abstract, and they want to do it quickly. So you're thinking the shortest sentence that adequately conveys what the heading is about or what it's for is best, as short and concise as you can be, and try not to use repetitive terms at the start of each heading, the same words, etc., because then it becomes very, very difficult for the user to differentiate. Okay, so that's the kind of thing you can see very clearly in that report, and you can judge whether your headings are helpful or not. But obviously anything would be an improvement over what we saw there. I noticed there is a JAWS Inspect Chrome extension. How does that differ to the tool you've demonstrated? It's not a JAWS Inspect. There is an extension that comes with part of JAWS Inspect, although we are going to remove it. And it just improves the interaction with the page with JAWS Inspect and the accuracy of identifying elements on the page. But it's not an extension for using JAWS Inspect and Chrome. With Chrome, it's the same menu that I showed in my demonstration, the context menu that you open with a control right click. Another question, I assume that if it is testing, it is as if it is JAWS. The outcomes will be very similar for NVDA. Yes, they would. I mean, the screen readers operate very similar ways. And there are differences, of course, but in general, it's going to be the same experience. And if an image does not have alternate text or has alternate text that's unreadable, like we saw in that example, it's going to be exactly the same for an NVDA user as it is for a JAWS user. Does it work well testing PDFs? Yes, it does. I do find, though, that to test the full interaction on a PDF, it's ideal to maybe run JAWS in the background. So you can run JAWS in parallel with JAWS Inspect. You turn off the audio in JAWS, keep your speech viewer open in JAWS Inspect, and that means that you can use your JAWS shortcut keys. If you're in any way experienced JAWS user, or you've used JAWS for testing, then you can use your shortcut keys, and that helps to get to certain content in your PDF. Again, you could use the H key to cycle through the headings in the PDF, for instance, and check them. But even if you don't do that, if you don't run JAWS in the background, it's still very helpful testing PDFs with JAWS Inspect. Does JAWS test PDFs? So yes, just what I was talking about there. JAWS obviously can test PDFs, and you can use JAWS with JAWS Inspect to test them completely. One of my users is using JAWS. We have had issues with a government website. They are not willing to script it or work with us. What are some workarounds? My users need accessibility to the site to do his job. Any suggestions or ideas? Yeah, that's a difficult one. If the developer, if you like, is not providing that help, then there are scripts. I mean, one service that we offer at TPGI is JAWS scripting, that provides better support for JAWS on things that can't be changed or would take a long time to change. That's an option. But it's a difficult one. If the information isn't, if they're not, for instance, alternate text for a graphic, what do you do? JAWS can't intuit it. We do have AI solution for JAWS, for instance, nowadays for getting around that particular problem and identifying the alternate text for an image. So there are better solutions with AI being added to JAWS that will help. But at the end of the day, the ultimate solution has to be that the developer and the owner of the site does something to improve it. Another question, is there a course class you can recommend for new JAWS users? Yeah, it's not, I can't really answer that. There are certainly, we've got classes, obviously, for JAWS users on learning JAWS. That FS Companion is great for introducing you to concepts of how to use JAWS. As I said, it's AI that's focused entirely, trained entirely on JAWS, so that's one good place to start. If I use JI with type of liability, if a company pays me for the assessment for their website, you can certainly use JAWS Inspect to check, legal risk issues that might cause compliance issues that could get a company in legal trouble. That kind of testing can be done. Need to back that up with some manual accessibility and compliance testing as well. Is it possible to get transcripts from a specific user workflow defined and simulated an automated end-to-end test? Yes, it is. In fact, you can run JAWS Inspect in a headless mode. The speech viewer is not visible on the screen, and you can run automated Selenium testing and so on. And from the command line, you can start the speech viewer. The speech viewer will log the output as you go, and then it will save the log into a file. So you can use it effectively with automated Selenium testing, etc. I think that's all the questions, and we're just gone slightly beyond the hour. So thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much for everyone. Again, the recording of the webinar will be sent out to all registered attendees later this week. If you have additional questions, you can reach out to IDA, that's IDA, at tpgi.com, and we'll get back to you. And thanks so much for joining us today. Charlie, thank you for your time. Look forward to seeing you guys again at our next webinar.
Thank you, everyone.